Good evening and welcome to this year's Jewish Historical Society Veterans Day commemoration. I'm Karen Auerbach-Bucaletti, the program manager for the Jewish Historical Society at Jewish Federation of Greater MetroWest. We're thrilled to have so many of you with us tonight. The Jewish Historical Society researches, acquires, and preserves the rich and vibrant Jewish history throughout Greater MetroWest. We maintain 600 collections in our archives dating back to the mid-1700s. We are still to this day our community's first and only Center for Historical Research. Our goal is to share this history with our community, to help acknowledge and celebrate the past, preserve the present, inform how we approach the future, all while reinforcing a strong foundation in Jewish identity and pride in our Jewish heritage. Because of your support and partnership, we can bring our stories to life. So thank you so much. Closed captioning is enabled for tonight's event. Please click the button on the bottom of the screen that says Show Captions. There's also going to be time for a live Q&A, so please submit your questions in our chat. It is now my pleasure to introduce the president of Jewish Federation of Greater MetroWest, David Saginaw.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everyone. We are so grateful for the Jewish Historical Society's dedication to our Greater MetroWest community and their invaluable role in preserving our history. As our Jewish Federation community prepares to celebrate its 100 years of service, we are proud to have the partnership of our Jewish Historical Society to share the stories, contributions, and impact throughout New Jersey. It's an honor to serve this dynamic community as the president of Jewish Federation of Greater MetroWest, and I'm pleased to be here this evening to commemorate Veterans Day with all of you. Now, I'd like to introduce our Jewish Historical Society's committee chair, Robert Rose.
Thank you, David. We're so pleased to bring back our Jewish Historical Society's programming to our community. Tonight, the Jewish Historical Society proudly commemorates this year's Veterans Day by recognizing Sydney Levit and his service to our country during World War II, in which he was wounded in action and awarded the Purple Heart. Sydney was born in Philadelphia on July 17, 1924. He was drafted into the Army at age 18 in April 1943, shortly after he graduated from high school. He is a part of what Tom Brokaw has called the greatest generation. Sydney served as an elite fighting force in the United States Army's 17th Airborne Division, nicknamed the Golden Talons. He fought in the Ardennes Forest during the Battle of the Bulge and in Operation Varsity, the airborne assault into Germany that helped pave the way to Allied victory in May 1945. After the war, Sydney settled in Morristown and raised his family there. And tonight, at age 98, we honor and we thank him for his service to our country.
Sydney Levit, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And we look forward to hearing about your story in honor of this year's Veterans Day. So please take it away.
Thank you for the opportunity. At the age of 18, I was drafted in the Army, and I was assigned to the 17th Airborne Division, which was paratroopers and glider infantry. Glider infantry was very, very simple, but not too well known. If you notice, the glider infantry is made, there's no motor, and you want to know how does this glider take off? You're towed by another plane. This is made out of canvas, pipe, and a floorboard of wood. It holds 13 men. It has a pilot and a co-pilot. This is a vehicle that only has one direction, down. And it has other components, which I think you'll find interesting. This is what we can do with the glider. We can lift the nose up, and as you see, it will carry a Jeep or a cannon, and it'll carry the driver and the co-driver. And that too is lifted by a plane. And that too only has one direction, and that's down. Anyway, in our training, we trained in Camp McCall, North Carolina. We were there several months and then transferred to Tennessee for maneuvers. And then we were quickly put together, flown to England for more training, and then we had to fly into the Battle of the Bulge. We then participated in the Battle of the Bulge with General Patton, and the weather was horrible, bitter cold. And we all suffered from the same ailment, frozen feet and hands. We went into the attack at Bastogne, and Bastogne we leveled. And then from there we moved in, and then we finished that part of the object. We were pulled back out of the line. The war at that time was ended, and we got our discharge, which was fine. Now try to picture this in your mind, clear your minds. 77 years later, I was invited to Bastogne with 6 other men. We leveled it, as I had mentioned, and it's completely rebuilt. The greetings from the people there was beyond belief. They were so happy to see us. And they constantly came up to us. My son said to me, well, I think we have to buy another suitcase because they kept plying us with so many gifts. And this is one. This was handed to me by a lovely lady, and it's cookies. And when I ate the cookies, which were delivered in waffle and caramel, this is what she had written. We then moved over to Wessel, which was completely rebuilt after we knocked it down. The people were so happy to greet us, Germans. Mm. We went to high school and we asked to speak there. Kids were 16, 17, well versed in English, and asked the other fellows and myself wonderful questions. And it became quite interesting because it reminded me how different everything was. I can tell you that we reached a point where we came out of the forest. It rained for days after days after days. We were miserable, absolutely miserable. We were instructed not to go into this huge building, which we realized was a jail. Oh, wow. It was surrounded by barbed wire. And we later found out that all the prisoners were English, French, and Greek, and the Germans who killed all the Russians that day. We disregarded what the captain said, and we went into the building to get dry and whatever, and we hear noise. We go down of course, the building is completely black. We go down the hallway, and we go into this room, and there's a huddle of men by a potbelly fire. And when you look at them, the thing that struck me was their eyes. I guess they were terrified of us because they didn't know what was coming next, and they didn't know anything about the Americans or the American soldiers. Then we heard a noise. It was like a hammering. So we went down the hall. A couple of us had flashlights, and this little man there, he was trapped by the machine for 2 years making shoes. Mm. And he swore if he ever is freed, he will wreck the machine. He found the hammer and he hammered the machine into smithereens. So we left the prison, we went back and we told the captain, yeah, I told you not to go there, but you did a good job saving these men. Mm. And then we continued on, and we were still chasing the Germans down. And we finally, I think we really ran out of Germans, soldiers that is. And it was a complete victory on our side, wonderful. And as I said, we had fought with General Patton, who was a great, it might have been a little flaky, but a great general, great general. So now, years later, we're going to be put on a ship. Months later, we were put on a ship to sail back to the United States to retrain and go and attack Japan. As I said, all of a sudden the ship virtually exploded with horns and everything. We found out that Japan was over. The war was finished. Now there's thousands of us coming into the port of New York. The ship was going to tip over because everybody ran to the one side to see the Statue of Liberty. Everybody was crying. And then all of a sudden I said to myself, oh my God, I got to get a job.
Sydney, could I ask you a few questions? So how many men were in the 17th Division with you?
Well, in my company were 8. During the course of the war, we went from 130, 140 men to 16. Our losses were huge. They merged the 193rd Regiment into the 194th. Both regiments lost so many men. And so that was very dramatic, very dramatic. And one of the interesting points were they were starting to send replacements up to us. And the sergeant lined us up, and he lined up all these replacements. And he said, if you want to live another day, the man who stands in front of you, if he moves to the left, you better move to the left. He moves to the right, you better move to the right. And you really develop the shadow. They never left your side. Anyway, it was a good experience. And all of these things were like unimaginable, really unimaginable. And I will tell you one thing, at the age of 18, 19, I really matured. And someone asked me, Sid, when did you feel that you were older? I said, the first time I heard a bullet go past my ear.
That's right.
I think they got a kick out of it. Anyway.
So being American at 18 and Jewish, what was the sentiment at the time in the United States of America, being Jewish, and their thoughts about World War II?
Well, it's a terrible thing to say, but it was a very popular war. Everybody wanted to go. Everybody wanted to go. And you were happy to go because you knew that there was a bad situation because of Hitler. And the amount of war that was going to be contained was beyond your comprehension. You're a kid. At the age of 18, I look at children. I look at kids that are 18. They're children. They're the same as I was. Absolutely. But I was proud, and they all knew it. They all knew I was Jewish. I never let them not know who I was. And as a result, I really think they respected me very much so.
Sure.
Yeah.
And when you came back, was there a difference in how Americans felt about Jews or how American Jews felt about the war?
No, I think quite honestly, they were happy. Everybody was happy. The war was over.
Right.
Your family, your father, your sons, your daughters are now free to come home and start their lives all over, get married and have children, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. I didn't sense any of that part. I really didn't. Of course, later on, now we know what's going on. It's horrible. They never learn. But being Jewish, I'm proud of it. I think I'm valuable to it. I object to it, not at all. And I think it's very important that whatever goes on, we're still Jewish. Still Jewish. Now, in my next move, of course, 77 years later, the Sions, which is a group of children who form this organization in honor of their fathers. And I was invited to go to Belgium. I can't believe it, 77 years later with my son. And the greetings and the value of all these Belgians, Hollanders, Germans valued our presence. It was beyond belief. How they respected us as veterans. and how the country, how they remodeled and rebuilt the two countries in the Bastogne and the Westland was beyond belief. And the adventures that we had, that we've all participated at this time of our life, was like, whoa. So one of the men, I love the story, one of the men walked in to meet us. He came in from a different airport, 100 years old. No cane, no wheelchair, no aid, and he was a pilot. And what they did, they gave him an honor flight. An honor flight consists of 4 airplanes, 1 in the front, 2 on the sides, and 1 in the rear. Old-fashioned, remodeled, open cockpit planes. Now, this is an optimist. The pilot, where he is riding with, turns around and says to him, "Would you like to fly the plane?" This is an optimist. He says, "No, I think I'll do it next year." I love that story. And then there was another, this is a true story. Jewish fellow was in a bomber. The bomber was hit. He parachuted down into Germany, and he was captured. And the fact that he was an officer, he was taken to this particular camp to meet the commandant. Picture this. He walks in the office. Oh, by the way, on the way down, he tore his dog tags, because in those days, your dog tags had your religion on it. H for Hebrew, C for Catholic, and so forth. He tore it and threw it down as he's coming down. He walks in, and the commandant is doing something, and he looks up, and he says to this fellow, "I know you," in English, perfect English. Now, can you imagine? You're captured, you're in Germany, you're taken to a camp, and the commandant turns and looks and says, "I know you." He says, "I know where your grandmother and grandfather live. I know what city you're from." Okay? He's like absolutely bewitched, bewildered, and bewildered. The story is that the commandant, when the war started, he and his family lived in Buffalo. And he was a paper boy. And he delivered the papers to the grandparents. When the war started, the whole family moved back to Germany. And he entered the German army. And he feels that he saved them. He made sure he had enough food. Quite a story. I mean, it gives you the chills even today when I tell it. Yeah. Wow. Talk about luck of the Irish Jewish.
Sydney, you are at this point, you've spoken, you've had honors in your life. What are your proudest moments? What are your fondest memories post World War II?
Being discharged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I was honored, I think 3 years ago, to fly to England on Memorial Day. And it was being held at the American Cemetery in Cambridge, England. You hate to say it, but it was a beautiful cemetery, beautiful. There was over 2,000 people there. Now, I didn't know it at the time. I was the only American veteran there. And I met General Doolittle's, I think it was his granddaughter. And she came actually looking for me, and we had a wonderful chat, charming, absolutely charming. And so much history, you know. And are you aware of the name von Papen? Probably not. Von Papen from World War I was a diplomat for the Germans, a spy. In World War II, he was also a spy. And we were moving through Germany, and we came across this farm. All the peasants lived in the walls. And we were tipped off that von Papen is up in the hills at his chalet. So we call back to regiment. Regiment calls back to Division 1. And they say, go get him, go get him. So we had to circle around like this to go up the hill because we thought maybe he had a lot of German troops there. We get to the top of the hill and there's a little cottage over a gorgeous view. And one man is sitting out on the porch with a rifle. Of course, he takes one look at us and he threw his rifle down. And we had a marvelous captain. And he was the kind of a guy, nothing bothered him. So he goes in through the window, and who's sitting at the table there is Von Poppman, dressed in his Tyrolean shorts and the suspenders and he turns around, of course he spoke English, and he turned around and said, well, I've been expecting you. Okay, yeah. So they take him down to regimental headquarters, they flew him back to England, and in Nuremberg trials, he was free, was not convicted of anything. And that was very interesting. His attitude was typical German. Oh, I expected you. While we were crossing Germany, we came out of this forest upon this beautiful lawn in front of a castle. The castle was 700 years old. It's still owned by a member of the family. The castle we went into, it was surrounded by a moat with water, crossed the bridge, and we met some German soldiers and ended up killing our sergeant, who should have been a marvelous officer. And we really had, really, it was like, if you believed in fairy tales, the castle was in the fairy tale. And we had a very, very good meeting with the Baron, and the Baron's family has owned this castle for 700 years. Yeah, he speaks very good English, very nice. And then we kept moving because we knew there were no Germans near us, so we kept moving to get rid of whatever was left. And the Germans were really beginning to give up. They knew it was hopeless. There was no place to go. And we were presented with this picture, monument for honor of Clinton Hedrick. And he was a great guy, good looking guy. Now I'm stationed in London, outside of London, and I'm able to go in to London, which was mobbed with American soldiers. And the only way I had able to get in was my grandmother, who was born in England, and my mother, who was an infant with King of the States. She wrote me a letter asking me, would I please go visit and find her cousins? I don't even know what part of London. There was no soldiers, none. So I'm walking down the street and I see the address. It's a greengrocer. It's all boarded up. I said, well, I'm here. So I knock on the door, nothing. Knock on the door, nothing. And the door opens. I take a look. Now, I was at the time 6 feet. And I look at this guy is 5 by 5. I don't know how I got through the door. And he looks at me and I say to him, are you Victor Kantrowitz? He says, yes. I said, well, I'm Fanny Polsky's grandson. Oh, he went bananas. He's screaming for his wife, Fanny. And he pulls me into the grocery store. And I got a duck because they're drying noodles. So the back of their house was knocked down by a V-bomb. Lucky for them, no one was hurt. So now they begged me to come back the next weekend, which of course I did. And I brought soap and cigarettes. I meet the son, who's a captain in the British Army. As his private first class in the American, I made more money than him. I made $132 a month. Okay, you can imagine what they paid him. And we got along great. It was fine. and they were very generous. And they ended up coming to the States and moved to Boston. Yeah. And I had great times. I really did. People say, you're nuts. But I did. I met great people. Great people. It's interesting. The Ritchie boys were they created this so-called underground of very, very smart guys. Not only Jewish, but Rockefeller was one of them. And what they did, they trained them to become spies. So how did they do it? Now, I never knew, and I couldn't swear to this, I never knew about the Ritchie boys. I only learned about it maybe 2 years ago. We had a guy come into my outfit, and I was standing next to him and the captain. We're in the middle of nowhere. He had an American uniform on, and he had a German accent. And he says to the captain, I think my grandparents are still living near here. I'd like permission to go look for him. And he gave it to them. We never saw him again. It never entered my mind until I saw this thing. This is only a guess. He would go, or they would go into a village and talk to the locals, and they would find out, have you seen any Germans? Have you seen any trucks? Have you seen any of this or any of that stuff? And that's how they got a lot of information. And then they were very good at, if they captured an officer or something like that, they were very good at getting information out of them. How did they do it? There was a movie that came out. A guy would come in a Russian office, a Russian officer. He was not. And they said, if you don't talk, you'll go back to Russia with this officer. Well, they talked. But once they saw that, and they were clever, very, very clever. And all the men were very intelligent. They all spoke many languages. And I think there's a book out. Or you can go online. I'm sure you can print it up online. They would tell you about the Ritchie boys. Very, very good. And a lot of Jews involved there. A lot of Jews. So I never gave it a thought, but maybe he was one of them because he never came back to our outfit. Yeah.
Well, Sydney, on behalf of the Jewish Historical Society and Jewish Federation of Greater MetroWest, thank you so much for your service.
I had fun.
Thank you. So, Sydney, we couldn't be happier than to have you here with us to commemorate this year's Veterans Day. So we're going to have a Q&A, and I'm going to ask you some questions from the chat. So thank you very much for participating. Sydney, can you please tell us a little bit about your experiences with liberating concentration camps?
Yes. We came, it was this house, a magnificent house overlooking the Rhine, and we're given 3 days rest. And we released a small Polish concentration camp. It was horrible, filthy. So the captain said, with all the women to go into the barracks and take out the straw mattresses. We're going to burn everything. We proceeded to delouse the women. We gave them clothes. We brought them to this magnificent house where a huge bust of Hitler overlooked the Rhine. So their job was to feed us, wash our clothes, and make our beds. Now you understand, they came out of a concentration camp. So I was walking around, it was like a slope leading to the Rhine, beautiful. And this woman, I didn't speak Polish, she didn't speak English, but she said one thing to me in German, "Too many Juden." Now, can you imagine that? You take a person out of a concentration camp, you feed him, you dress him, you bathe him, you care for them. And that's the first thing out of her mouth. But I was dumb. I was about 19 then. And I guess I was stunned. I should have went to the captain and booted her rear end back into the camp. And I didn't.
So So Sydney, next question. We want to know, what was one of the scariest moments that you've experienced during your service?
It was the Battle of the Bulge. It was bitter, bitter, bitter cold. We all suffered, as I mentioned earlier, frozen feet and frozen hands. But there was a very interesting thing happened. It was Christmas Eve. All of a sudden, the Germans, now we were on one side of the slope, the Germans were on the other side. We could see each other. And then all of a sudden, there were bonfires. They were building bonfires. And it got deadly quiet. So we started building bonfires because it was a bitter cold. And then all of a sudden, the Germans started singing Christmas songs. And we started to sing Christmas songs. The night was peaceful. You finally had a good night's sleep. They had a good night's sleep. You got up the next morning at 6 a.m. or whatever time, and you started shooting. Isn't that a shame? It's a terrible story, but true. But true.
That's a beautiful story. So this may answer itself, but somebody would like to know, what's an experience that you had during the war that still brings a smile to your face?
Oh, you don't want to know. As I said earlier, I really had a good time in the Army, not so much in combat, but I mean around it. The guys, my buddies, were very brave. And I was the only Jew in the group. I was in the mortar squad. And in mortar squad, there's a few less men in the regular rifle squad. And we got along great. And they were always up to something. We would go to a bar, and I never drank beer in my life, but I ended up learning how. And the guys were fun. They really were fun. They could wipe anything out of their minds for that particular fun moment. It was great. But I'll tell you one thing. This is true. Do I have a minute?
Yeah. Yes, you have a minute.
So I met this girl in London. Very nice. I was very happy, and she was very happy that I would take her out. So what happened was I would meet her in London because I was able to get out, even though it was a zillion GIs, and you couldn't get into camp unless you had a reason. So my grandmother happened to write a letter telling me to go visit her cousins. So I was able to get into London, and I met this girl. And that's where I learned to eat fish and chips. And when I first got the first batch, it was on newspaper. I said, oh my God. So anyway, I took her out maybe 3 weekends or something like that. Maybe on the third weekend, she says to me, Sydney, Mom and Dad would like to meet you. I said, oh, my mother is not going to be happy. So now I go to her house. I don't know where it was. It's a very small, typical English house, a little fireplace. It's small. So I'm sitting in the living room, and Dad is speaking to me. And Mom made me tea and cookies. And he leans to me like this. And he looks in my eyes. And he said to me, Sydney, I have to ask you a question. And I roll my eyes. I said, my mother is not going to like this. Is it true, he says, that every American has a refrigerator?
That's the question. That's the personal question. What a relief, right?
Yes. It was fun. Huh? I don't see what it. Anyway, I'll tell you, I'll repeat it. I had outside of combat. I mean, I had a good time. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sydney. We really appreciate it. If you have other questions for everybody who's with us tonight, please put them in the chat. Sydney, can you tell us how your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids have sort of celebrated you all of these years with all of your accomplishments?
Well, for many years, I didn't talk about it. But then I realized I'm not so smart because there's so much history that the young people do not learn in school or even in college. Hardly anybody realizes about the university campaign. That was carried out by the 6th British Airborne and the 17th Airborne, my outfit. And we went into Wessel, and we knocked Wessel down. Today, when I got back into Wessel, it's completely rebuilt, completely. And it was a learning experience. So I decided a few years ago that I was going to start talking about it, because I wanted people to understand how lucky they are in this country, and that they can get up every morning and they can go to any store and buy any food that they want. They don't have to worry about anybody knocking on their door. It's the police. They don't have any problems under any kind of pressure except living.
Mhm. Mhm. So somebody wants to know, did you meet General Patton and what was he like?
No, we were part of his army, and we knew all about him. Needless to say, his reputation was, he was a gallant man. A lot of people didn't like him, but he was a very, very good general, very good. My outfit was what we had called a bastard outfit. We would fight with Patton, they would shift us over to Montgomery, we would ship us over to Bradley. I mean, we never knew who the general was. They kept shipping us so much because they needed the extra troops.
Mhm.
And we suffered, as my outfit, which was the 193rd Airborne, we lost so many men, we merged with the 194th Airborne. And then you never saw a general. You have to understand what you're taught in the Army. There's one direction, and they teach you and they show you where you're supposed to be. Forward. You don't know what's on the left. Well, you may, you know, there's another outfit or what's on the left. That's it. That's it.
Right.
You got to be dumb and young. I was both.
Sydney, were you able to keep in touch with some of the men that you fought alongside with?
Yes.
And how did that relationship develop once you were back in the United States?
Well, I used to get roughly about 12 Christmas cards. That was the only time I would hear from them. And now I get none. I'm the only living guy who's around. So that's sad story. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
I must say this. We had a lovable guy. His name was Nick McCandy. He's about 6'2". He was in my outfit. And we were up on the hill in the Battle of the Bulge, and we were miserable. And all of a sudden he's, oh my God. So we go, maybe he got hurt. I can't believe it. So what's the matter? He says, it's my birthday. He forgot.
Mhm.
So Nick was a terrific guy, very nice. They all were good.
Yeah.
They were great men, brave. Yeah.
So Sydney, I love that you talked about how you think that the people that you fought alongside with respected you because you were openly Jewish.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us about some of the ways that you were able to celebrate Judaism while you were deployed and fighting World War II?
Well, what I did when I was in London, I would go to synagogue, and their prayers were very similar to ours, the music also. And then one day, I'll never forget, Easter Sunday, and we were in someplace in Germany, and the church there had been knocked down. The only thing that was standing was the cross. I was like, whoa. And the fellows asked me to go with them. Of course, the priest there, he knew we were mixed. So he gave a very nice sermon. We sat on, all the pews were gone, so we sat on our helmets. And the minute I got with these 8 guys, I said to them, I just want you guys to know that I'm Jewish. They never met a Jew. They were from Missouri, Iowa, upstate New York, upstate Pennsylvania, which is like redneck country. And I never had a day of problems, never.
Right.
So that was good.
So someone wants to know, has your view of war in general, thinking about the Korean War and the Vietnam War, and maybe even the conflict in Ukraine right now, has your view of war changed?
Well, quite honestly, it has to change. It's different. It's different. You got to remember, World War II was a popular war. Everybody wanted to go. If you were declared 4F, you felt it was a disgrace. And we were all anxious to go. And when you got your notice, boy, I got in. The Korean War was a disaster. The Vietnam War was a disaster. Every war that we've been in since World War II has been a disaster. And they're all responsibility of one man, our president at that time, Putin now. And And I don't understand, what are they looking for?
Mhm.
They all have egos, and it's costly to everybody around them. I can assure you, Putin is eating 3 meals a day, and the people in Ukraine are maybe they get 1 meal a day. It's a nightmare.
So somebody has a personal question. Where did you meet your wife? And can you tell us a little bit about your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids?
That's a long story. No. I met my wife before I went into service. And we kept in contact while I was in the service. And I really had a feeling wanted her. So when I came home, she was going with another guy. And so, I mean, we were really kind of meshing. And I said to her, Ellie, you got to make up your mind. I'm not going to talk to you for a week. It's either me or Stretch. She was about 6'4". So she said to me, I'll never forget her word. She says, well, Sid, I'm afraid it's me, buddy. So we were married 57 years. I have 3 children. I have 6 grandchildren. And I got 11 great grandchildren. My big problem with 11 grandchildren, I got to keep their names straight. Very difficult.
So your friend Rich would like you to tell the story about tea and tanks.
Oh my God. Well, we were moving through Germany, pretty good. And stuff was flying all over.
Mhm.
And all the American soldiers were flat on their tummy, so we wouldn't get hit. And all of a sudden I hear a noise. And I look up, it's an English tank. And there's 4 English soldiers on the top of the tank. And the one guy, and I yell at him, I said, you guys get down, there's stuff flying on. And they yell back to me, would you like a spot of tea? They were brewing tea on top of the tank, like nothing was going on. And I said to myself, either they're blessed or I'm nuts. Anyway, needless to say, I didn't get up and I didn't go for tea. They were great.
That's excellent. So Sydney, I do want to get to the last question, but we've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you to
Me too.
commemorate this
Me.
Veterans Day. But I would be absolutely remiss if we didn't thank our Jewish Historical Society community.
Yes.
It's because of all of you and your support and participation that we're able to bring these stories to life. So to make a donation or renew your support this year, we'd love for you to visit our website that's posted in the chat. So thank you so much. So Sydney, we're going to get back to you. We have one more question. Maybe we'll take some more at the end, but certainly we want to make sure that we get to this one. Can you tell us how you can attribute your long life and positive attitude at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
I never smoked. I was never a big eater. I exercised and I ate a lot of ice cream.
Yeah, that does sound like a recipe
which I still
for
do.
success.
Oh, yeah. And the most important thing, you got to keep moving around, whether you can walk good or whether you can't, you got to keep moving. Otherwise, whatever.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm having a good time.
I'm having a good time. Thank you so much,
Thank
Sydney. This has
you.
been wonderful. Just to close out our program, I am going to pass it back to our Jewish Historical Society Committee Chair, Bob Rose. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sydney. It's been an amazing opportunity this evening to hear you, to listen to you, to commemorate this year's Veterans Day. You are really an incredible person. I can see just based on your demeanor and your personality, it took you through the war successfully in a very, very, very difficult time. You came home, you succeeded, you have a wonderful family. It's just a really heartwarming, rich story. And I think certainly I feel it in my heart. And I'm sure everybody on this Zoom feels the very, very much the same way that I do. And so again, we thank you, Sydney, for your service to our country and all that you've accomplished since then. And I say to you, God bless Sydney.